This isn't the kind of story you expect to hear from a friend over coffee, but that's exactly how it came to me. I was sitting with a former coworker in a small cafe, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a coffee pot that never seems fresh. We were catching up, talking about kids and work, when she started telling me about what happened to her cousin's family after they moved into a new neighborhood. She said it still made her skin crawl to think about. Her cousin Claire and her husband David bought their first house after renting apartments for years. It wasn't fancy, just a modest 2-story place on a quiet street in upstate New York. They had a 5-year-old daughter named Sophie who was shy, the kind of kid who hid behind her mother's legs when strangers said hello. From the very first week, Claire noticed the woman across the street. She was probably in her early 40s, with short brown hair and a thin face that looked almost delicate. Every evening around dusk, she sat in her front window in a wooden chair. She never seemed to do anything, no TV on, no phone in her hand, just sitting there looking out. At first, Claire didn't think much of it. People have habits. Maybe the woman liked to watch the sunset. But after a couple of weeks, she realized the woman wasn't just looking out. She was looking directly at their house. It wasn't every second. Sometimes she would glance away, stand up to get a glass of water, or disappear into another room for a while. But inevitably, she'd come back and sit in the same spot, her gaze fixed. Claire mentioned it to David one night as they were getting ready for bed. He laughed it off. "Some people are lonely," he said. "It's probably nothing." But it didn't feel like nothing. The routine never changed. Every night, just as the streetlights flickered on, there she was, watching. A month or so later, it got colder, and Claire started keeping the curtains closed in the evenings. One night she forgot. When she passed the living room window, she glanced across the street and saw the woman again. Only this time, she was holding something up to her face, a pair of binoculars. Claire froze. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She called David over. By the time he looked, the binoculars were gone, replaced by that same blank stare. "She's watching us," Claire whispered. David frowned. "You're sure she was holding binoculars?" "I saw them." He hesitated, then shrugged. Maybe she was looking at something behind the house, a bird or something. But Claire didn't buy it. Over the next few weeks, she started noticing other things. When she and Sophie would walk to the mailbox in the afternoon, the woman would sometimes step out onto her porch and just stand there, not saying a word. One Saturday, Claire and Sophie were working in the front flower bed, pulling out the dead annuals. Claire looked up and saw the woman sitting in a lawn chair on her driveway, staring at Sophie with an intensity that made her stomach turn. She picked Sophie up and carried her inside without saying anything. That evening, she told David she wanted to confront the woman, but he convinced her to wait. "If she hasn't done anything, what are we going to say?" he asked. "That we don't like the way she looks at us?" Claire reluctantly agreed. But things didn't stop. A couple of weeks later, Claire went outside to take out the trash and saw a small envelope sitting on their porch. No name, no address, just a plain white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You should braid her hair before school. She would look so much nicer." Claire felt a chill that settled between her shoulder blades. She showed the note to David. He didn't laugh this time. The next morning, David walked across the street and knocked on the woman's door. He told Claire he was just going to ask politely if she'd left the note. No one answered. He knocked again. Finally, he saw the curtain move, just a fraction. But still no one came to the door. David came back looking more uneasy than Claire had ever seen him. "She was there," he said. "I saw her watching me through the window." Claire called the non-emergency police line. The officer listened patiently, but said that unless the woman had trespassed or threatened them, there wasn't much they could do. That night, the woman was back in her window, watching. Claire tried to tell herself it was just an odd neighbor. Maybe the woman was lonely or not quite right in the head. But when she tucked Sophie into bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the note. The phrasing of it, "She would look so much nicer," as if the woman believed she had some right to weigh in on how Sophie should look. The next morning, she taped a piece of paper over the front window so the woman couldn't see in. David wasn't sure it would help, but Claire felt like she had to do something. For a couple of days, nothing happened. No more notes, no more staring from the porch. Then, one Thursday, she found another envelope on the porch when she came home from dropping Sophie at preschool. "Don't let her play so close to the street. Someone could take her." Claire's hands shook as she read it. She waited until David came home from work and thrust the note at him without a word. His jaw tightened as he read. "That's it," he said. "We're putting up cameras." They installed a camera over the front door and another pointing at the driveway. It didn't stop the notes. Every few days, a new envelope would appear. "She should eat more vegetables." She was wearing the same sweater twice this week. I can see she's tired. Maybe let her nap longer. The notes weren't threatening exactly, but they felt invasive. Like the woman was insinuating herself into their family, one observation at a time. David called the police again. This time, the officer came to the house. He looked over the notes, took their statement, and walked across the street to speak with the woman. Claire watched from the window. The woman opened the door but stood half hidden behind it. She didn't look at the officer, just nodded occasionally. After a few minutes, the officer came back. "She denies leaving any notes," he said. "Says she doesn't know what you're talking about." Claire stared at him. "But she's watching us every night." The officer sighed. "I get it, but unless she makes a threat or trespasses, there's not much we can do. Document everything. If she escalates, call us right away." David thanked him, though it was clear he felt as helpless as Claire did. That night, they kept all the lights off in the living room and sat together on the couch. When they looked across the street, the woman was in her chair, as always. "She's sick," Claire whispered. David didn't answer. By the weekend, Claire decided she couldn't stand feeling watched anymore. She bought blackout curtains and hung them in every front-facing window. For the first time since they moved in, she felt like she could breathe. Sophie, thankfully, didn't seem to notice. She was too little to understand why Mommy kept closing the curtains and why Daddy kept checking the locks. But the notes kept coming. They found them tucked under the doormat, wedged in the mailbox, once even taped to the back gate. She shouldn't watch so much TV. You never take her to the park anymore. She looked sad today. Claire stopped reading them in detail. She stuffed them in a shoebox in the hall closet. But every time she found a new one, she felt her pulse race. Around mid-November, things escalated. Claire was folding laundry in the bedroom when she heard Sophie talking downstairs. At first, she assumed she was playing pretend. But the tone of her voice, soft and shy, sounded different. She hurried down and found Sophie standing by the front door. The door was ajar. Claire's heart lurched. "Sophie, who were you talking to?" Sophie looked up with big eyes. "The lady." "What lady?" "The lady from the window." Claire's hands went cold. "What did she say?" "She said she had something to give me." Claire slammed the door shut and locked it. David came home early that day. Claire told him everything. That evening, David crossed the street again. He pounded on the woman's door until she opened it. Claire watched from the porch, stomach in knots. David didn't shout, but his voice was hard, clipped. Claire couldn't hear all the words, but she caught fragments. "Stay away. Police. My daughter." The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, expressionless, like she was listening to something far away. After a moment, she closed the door in his face. They didn't call the police this time. It felt pointless. A week passed with no notes, no sightings. Claire started to believe maybe it was finally over. Then, the day before Thanksgiving, she found something worse than a note. When she opened the mailbox, there was a small plastic bag inside. Inside the bag was a lock of blonde hair tied with a pink ribbon. Claire's vision blurred. Her first thought was that it was Sophie's hair. David took it straight to the police station. The officer promised they'd do a wellness check and escalate the case. That night, they slept with the bedroom door locked. Claire barely closed her eyes. The next morning, David got a call from the police. The officer said they'd gone to speak with the woman. She answered the door but refused to let them in. She insisted she hadn't put anything in their mailbox and that she hadn't spoken to Sophie. "They can't arrest her," David told Claire as he hung up. "They said there's no proof the hair came from her, and it might have been animal fur." Claire didn't believe that for a second. They decided to spend Thanksgiving with Claire's parents 2 hours away. For the first time since they'd moved in, Claire felt a tiny sense of relief. Being out of the house, out of the neighborhood, made her feel like she could breathe again. They stayed through the weekend. When they drove back Sunday night, Claire tried to prepare herself for what they might find. Another note, maybe, or more hair in the mailbox. But when they pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal. The house across the street was dark, no light in the front window. Claire told herself that was a good sign. That night, after the kids were asleep, she stood at the living room window, peeking through a gap in the blackout curtain. The woman's house remained dark. Claire whispered to herself. Maybe she finally stopped. She was wrong. The next day, David went to work early. Claire was home alone with Sophie. She was making lunch in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. She froze. She didn't want to answer it. But after a minute, she crept to the peephole. No one there. She slowly cracked the door open and looked down. On the mat was another envelope. "You left her alone too long today. I worry about her." Claire's hands were shaking so badly she could hardly close the door. She called David, her voice breaking. He promised to leave work and come straight home. After she hung up, she went to the hall closet and took out the shoebox of notes. She started reading them all again, one by one, trying to find some logic, some pattern. That's when she noticed something she hadn't before. On the back of several notes was a series of small, faint pencil marks, just little crosses or check marks. She couldn't figure out what they meant, but seeing them made her feel sick. David came home and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers. "We have to move," she whispered. "I know," he said. That night, they packed suitcases and called Claire's parents to ask if they could stay for a while. They planned to leave the next morning, but they never got the chance. At about 4 a.m., David jolted awake. At first, he thought he'd dreamed something. Then he realized he was hearing a noise, a creaking floorboard. His heart lurched. He slipped out of bed and moved down the hallway, past Sophie's room. He pressed his ear to her door. Silence. Then he turned toward the stairs and saw a shape at the end of the hall. A woman stood in the doorway of Sophie's room. She was holding something small in her hand, though David couldn't see what it was. For a split second, they stared at each other. Then she took a step into the room. David charged forward, his bare feet slapping the hardwood. He crashed into her with his shoulder, knocking her sideways into the wall. The woman didn't cry out. She just looked at him with that same blank expression. He grabbed her wrists and wrestled her back into the hallway. Her hands were bony and cold. The thing she'd been holding fell to the floor. A small pink barrette, identical to the one Sophie wore to school. Claire appeared behind him, screaming. David pinned the woman against the wall with one arm and fumbled for his phone with the other. The woman didn't struggle. She just stood there, breathing hard. When the police arrived minutes later, they led her outside in handcuffs. Even then, she didn't resist. Claire and David gave statements, though Claire could barely speak. The officers searched the woman's house. They found dozens of photographs, some printed, some taped up in neat rows, all of Sophie. The earliest ones were from the week they moved in. An officer said quietly that he thought the woman had been watching them for a long time before she ever left the first note. When they asked why she'd been in the house, she finally spoke. "She looked so lonely," she said. "I just wanted to be close to her." It wasn't an answer that made sense, but it was the only one they ever got. The police told them she had no criminal record, no history of violence, no obvious motive beyond whatever was wrong in her head. After she was taken away, Claire and David packed everything they could fit in the car. By sunrise, they were driving away. They never went back to that house. Claire's parents let them stay as long as they needed. Eventually, they moved to a new city, far enough that no one there had ever heard of what happened. For a while, it almost felt like a bad dream. But sometimes, late at night, Claire would lie awake and replay that moment. The shape in the doorway, the silent figure stepping into her daughter's room. And she would realize that no matter how far they moved, she'd never again feel as safe as she once did. Because sometimes, you don't really know who's watching. And sometimes, when you find out, it's already too late. Thank you for listening. Until the next heartbeat in a story. Subscribe and stay for more love in every word.